Welcome to the show, everyone. Oh, I've been looking so forward to doing this show with Bill Aron for weeks. We actually had the storm that knocked our show out, so I had to reschedule him, and I swear we must have had about 6,000 people, Bill, who are waiting to watch this show. I am not kidding you. So I am really looking forward to posting this show around as soon as we are done. But let me tell you a little bit about our guest tonight, Bill Aron. He's a photographer, but he's also the author of the book, New Beginnings, The Triumphs of 120 Cancer Survivors. And it's through Skyhorse Publishing, and it was published in 2015. Now, that's an amazing book, The Triumphs of 120 Cancer Survivors. And as you know, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Besides also being Halloween, it's sort of like, boo, you have cancer. And if you're watching the show and you are in treatment, know that this is just a bump in your road. You're going to come through this. You're going to come out the other side, and you're going to be a stronger person because of it. And that's one of the things that Bill Aron and I are going to talk about today. When the treatment's all over with, when all the doctor's appointments are finished, when you don't have to go in and have any more blood tests, there seems to be this vacuum. And although you're kind of glad it's there, it can be a little scary too. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Bill Aron.
Thank you, Kat. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate that you're having me. You just summarized my book perfectly. I think the most important takeaway from the book is can best be summed up by a friend of mine who, when I was post-surgery, when I was undergoing treatment, he came over to visit me, and he said, you know, I don't wish to have cancer, but I do wish that something would happen that would make me change my life and reevaluate everything that I'm doing. And I think for cancer survivors, that time to change is now, to make a better life, to create a life well lived.
Oh, I so agree. And, you know, cancer or any illness, any life-threatening situation is a wake-up call. And on the show that I did just before you with Rachel, we were talking about a dream that she had, and quite often cancer survivors, cancer patients, anybody in a life-threatening situation starts getting that information from the other side. Our spirit guides, our guardian angels, they can come to us through those sacred dream doors, and they can kind of help us get onto that path that's our life purpose. And some of that purpose, believe it or not, is as difficult as it is to believe, Bill, some of that life purpose is to come through this crisis and back into the sunlight so that you can help somebody else that might not make it without your help.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that amazed me was that in addition to the fact that every one of these 120 survivors wanted to make their lives mean something, they wanted to make their lives mean something for other people. Mm-hmm. It's as if their diagnosis and treatment had woken them up from just meandering along through life. And they wanted to help others predominantly. And they some engaged in raising money. Some began to visit treatment centers just to sit with other people who were undergoing difficult treatments. Some reached out when they found out that other people were diagnosed with cancer, called them up and said, look, you know, I've been through it. Some of them started cancer survivor organizations, and some even felt that they were living for others that had not made it. And the motivation seems to be to have their lives make a difference.
Oh, that is so true. So Bill, you know, just so that our audience knows, you went through cancer yourself. Is that correct? Can you tell us share a little bit with us about that?
Sure. A number of cancers are the younger you are when you get them within a certain framework, the more virile they are. I think breast cancer is that way, and prostate cancer is that way. And that's what I had. I had prostate cancer develop when I was 48. And they measure well, it's a little complicated, but they measure the virility of the cancer on a scale from 2 to 10, and I had a 10. So I knew that, as one of the people in the book said, cancer pulled my head right out of my ass. Because the thing about stage 4 is that there's no stage 5. And it made me see my life in totally different terms. I had no idea that I would still be alive in 10 years. I fully expected not to be. Both my parents had died when they were young. And so I thought, well, this is it for me. First reaction is usually fear, followed by an anger and a motivation. And universally, there is a feeling of being all alone. And what I hope my book does, is let people who are diagnosed know that they are not alone, that there are resources out there, and that people make it through. And the time of suffering is a finite time, and that the suffering will end and they will come out the other side.
That's so true. And I used to always repeat to myself, to be in pain is human. To suffer is a choice. And I chose not to suffer. I said, it doesn't matter how much pain I'm in. I am not going to suffer because I am not a victim. And like you, my cancer was breast cancer, but it was stage 4. And I remember thinking, just like you did, there's no 5 on the earth plane anyhow. And I was very frightened. And then I said, there comes a point. Did you find this, Bill, that you got to a point where you were so overwhelmed with all the information and all the treatments and hearing all the sad stories of all the people who didn't make it and everything that everybody else went through, that you finally just kind of throw up your hands and you say, God, thy will be done. If I'm going to die, go ahead and take me. I'm good with that. If I'm not, then show me the path here on earth so I can get on it and get on with my life. Did you reach that?
That's a wonderful articulation. I went through a prolonged period of anger. I had belonged to an HMO at the time of my diagnosis, and I had to really fight them for the test, the PSA blood test, that indicated there was a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have cancer, but a high score indicates that you have to have a biopsy and look further. When I went in for my biopsy, the doctor looked and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing." And then it turned out to be cancer. When I went for my surgery, the doctor said, "Don't worry about it. We got it all." And then it showed up again a year later. So my anger was really profound at the whole medical establishment. And I did everything alternative. I went to Mexico for treatments. I saw herbologists. I saw healers. And nothing really worked. And I got out of that HMO and I found a private oncologist who specialized in prostate cancer. And he was really terrific in bringing me around and helping me to see that for every cancer, there are people who survive and go on to lead normal, happy, sometimes better lives. You don't know if you're going to be the one, but as long as you're alive, you're in the battle. And so my anger was kind of prolonged. And when I finally came out of it, I went to a support group, and someone in the support group was on his way out because he had been there a year. And he made a remark that said, "Cancer's the best thing that ever happened to me." And I went and I grabbed him after the session was over. And I said, "What do you mean? This is the worst thing that ever happened to me." And he says, "Well, no, I wouldn't have done this and I wouldn't have done," and he named a bunch of things in his life that would not have happened had he not been moved by this diagnosis of cancer to make those changes. So I began to think about that, and I heard other people express similar thoughts, maybe not in those words. And I actually just began an investigation of interviewing people who had been diagnosed and who were post-treatment, and finding out what their lives were like. And all of those people became my teachers. They showed me how to view this dreadful thing that had happened to me in a different light. That's a long answer by way of.
No, that was a great answer.
Fine.
That was a great, and you know what? It just absolutely amazes me while I'm sitting here listening to your story is the reason I wrote my book, Surviving Cancerland, Intuitive Aspects of Healing, is because I went through much of what you went through. I started having dreams telling me that I had breast cancer when the doctors were telling me I was healthy. They were telling me my mammograms were healthy and to go home. My blood tests were healthy to go home. They couldn't feel anything. Yeah. And it took me 3.5 months to finally convince them to do exploratory surgery. And I was in stage 2 with it in my lymph nodes. I was 41, which is very dangerous to have breast cancer that's aggressive in your lymph nodes at that age. And so I was going through the same thing you were going through.
Right. It's science is great, but there's also listening to our own bodies and giving us the direction that we need to go in. You know, Susan Sontag wrote a wonderful book on illness, and she said that when you're diagnosed with a serious illness, it's like you're transported to another country, and there's this huge river between you and the old country. And I think some people are able to see what it's like on the other side, and they're able to feel intuitively that, there's something wrong and that they need to investigate. The story that you just mentioned is one that is not unfamiliar, unfortunately. A number of people had to really fight in the book, had to really fight with their doctors to do the proper tests, because they were not in the age when they were supposed to get the cancer. Mm-hmm. One person who wound up being a physician, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer in his 20s. And then he was diagnosed with testicular cancer in his 40s. And it's unheard of, but he had those particular genes that were defective and that allowed that to happen.
Mm-hmm. So with all these stories that are in your book, these 120 wonderful stories, did you see the similarity between them of the patients standing in their power and speaking their truth, being advocates for themselves?
I think it's very important to be an advocate for yourself. And if you can't do it, then it's important to have somebody there who can. I can't stress that enough. Someone needs to go with the person who's diagnosed to the initial appointments with the doctor. Someone needs to be there when the person comes out of surgery, if that's the treatment, or they need to be there with the person while they're getting their chemo radiation, or outside, or not chemo radiation, chemotherapy, or outside the radiation room. Someone needs to keep an eye, because the cancer patient is so full of angst and anxiety and other thoughts. It's like it crowds everything out of the mind. I know I have very little I have very little memory of those things that happened in the initial appointments with the doctors before my surgery. And my wife was there to take notes and to say, no, you're not remembering that right. This is really what happened and really what the doctor said. Mm-hmm. So, yes, an advocate is very important. And sometimes another person is important besides yourself to keep you on track and to make sure everything. I had had knee surgery, and I was taking a particular drug for my for a nerve problem that I have, and it's a drug that's kind of addicting. And they said, don't bring any of your drugs to the hospital. Just leave them. Just leave them alone. Leave them at home and tell us when you come. Well, I told them when I entered the hospital for my surgery what I was taking. And of course, they didn't have that drug for me because it didn't get transferred to the nurse. And so I was going out of my mind post-surgery because I was missing this medication. And until we found the doctor to approve the giving of it, it was, you know, it was an unnecessary extra grief for me to bear. And my wife certainly helped with that. And without her, I'm not sure I might still be there.
I know that in my book I talk about that too, because when you are getting all of this information that is just frightening, you can't believe the things that they're saying, and you're going, but that can't be happening to me. When I came home, I wrote in my journal, and my whole book is actually from my journal. I wrote, when you go to the doctor, if you can't take someone with you, take a tape recorder or record it on your phone. And then later, when you calm down and you can come out of yourself because you're hiding in there, you're so frightened, you're hiding in there, listen to it again and take down notes, because it's almost like you've heard of hysterical blindness. It's almost like hysterical deafness. Right. You see their lips moving, but you can't hear what they're saying.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things that that's really important. If you're watching this show and you're a caregiver, and the person that you're caring for says, "Oh, no, I'll be okay. I just want to go into the doctor's office and I'll be all right." Go with them. Ask them to please just let you go with them, because the chances are really good they're not going to remember what was said, because it's just too frightening to hear it.
It is. It's absolutely crucial to have somebody with you. And you also can't think of the right questions to ask because you're still stuck on that statement. I have cancer, I have cancer, I have cancer. Well, there's a lot of questions that need to be resolved. And if you can't think of them, they never get answered.
And for those of you watching this show tonight, and you're thinking, well, my cancer is so bad, there may not be any way for me to survive. I've got a doctor coming to stay at my house this weekend, and he survived pancreatic cancer. He survived it 30 years. He's now an oncologist. He's one of the few that have done that. But the point is, if he can do it, all you have to do is have one person start by surviving something like that. It's sort of like the Olympics. Somebody breaks the record, and then all of a sudden, all these other people come through right behind him, and they break the record. So no, there are people out there who have survived pancreatic cancer. And his pancreatic cancer spread to his bones, spread to his brain, and he still got over it.
Wow.
So just remember that when you're going in there going, well, I've got stage 4 breast cancer, or I've got this, or I've got that. You can do it. You can do it. It's possible. Just focus on that. Don't focus on how many people didn't survive. Focus on the ones that beat the odds, and tell yourself you're going to be one too. So what was it, Bill, that triggered this idea in your mind that you might have cancer if all your tests were good too?
I'm a photographer, and I was photographing an event. It was a lecture by a urologist. At the time, PSA test was rather new, and he was talking about it, saying that this was a new test that could help us catch prostate cancers at a much younger age. And so on my next physical, I went to the doctor at the doctor's office, and I said, does this HMO have the PSA? And he says, yeah, we have it, but you don't need it. So I said, well, I like to have it. He says, yeah, but I just examined you. You don't need it. So I said, well, I really have to insist. I want that test. And the test came back positive. So he said, well, this has to be a mistake. We'll do the test again. So we redid it, and it came back still high. And then the rest I've told you, we went for a biopsy and so forth and so on. So it was like yourself. It was something that I had to really insist on. And once you insist, they can't say no, because then there's liability involved.
Exactly. But isn't it interesting how your guardian angels just kind of made sure that you were there, photographing that particular speaker at that particular time? And then it saved
A number of stories in the book that can be attributed to guardian angels are quite a few. There was a cutest little girl, had a very rare cancer. And it's the kind of cancer that is often, most often, discovered too late. And they were on a the family was on a camping trip. And then for something else, they had to see a doctor. And the doctor did a blood test and saw that this little girl had that cancer. And the consensus among the doctors was that she was just 2 weeks ahead of it being discovered too late. Another woman was camping with her friends. Again, her dog was there. And the dog, they were sitting around a campfire at night, and the dog started pawing at her lower abdomen and sort of whine, you know how dogs kind of whine. It sounds like a cry almost. And she couldn't get the dog to stop. So she had heard about dogs' power to know things that are going on. So she went to the doctor, and sure enough, she had ovarian cancer, turned out. So there are these little things in life that we have to pay attention to. We don't always understand them, but we need to pay attention and look inside ourselves. I think that's another thing that I learned from doing this project, is to really pay attention to myself and to figure out what's going on. Am I reacting out of emotion, or am I reacting out of something inside that's telling me that I better pay attention to what's going on?
So can you hold your book up for us so we can all see it?
Here it is. I'm very proud of it. I'm happy to.
It's a beautiful book. New Beginnings.
Thank you. New Beginnings, the triumphs of 120 cancer survivors. Like many people, it gave me a whole new perspective on my life. And after I had spoken with a number of people who found life's meaning, found a direction in their life after a diagnosis of cancer, I decided that this was a great project to do. And I was supposed to stop at 100, but then I asked the publisher if I could just do a couple more people who I had waiting. And they said, oh, sure, take your time. So a couple months later, they called me up and they said, well, by our count, you have 120. I think we should stop now.
It'd be a really big book otherwise. But, you know, you have a PhD in, was it sociology?
Yes.
What made you decide to become a photographer instead of a professor of sociology?
How much time do you have?
we got a while. Go ahead.
It's actually an interesting story. When I was 10, when I was 9, my father died. And when I was 10, my mother took me to Atlantic City. I was raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I left her with her friends, and I went walking along the boardwalk in Atlantic City, and there was a pier that goes out on the water with a lot of, it's like an arcade. And as you walked in the pier, I was 10 years old. As you walked in the pier, there was this giant Ferris wheel. Not Ferris wheel, giant, what do you call this, things that go around?
Yeah, that's the Ferris wheel.
No, with the numbers.
Numbers? You're yeah, I know what you're talking about, with the little ball gets in there, and yeah, roulette wheel.
You got more brain cells than I do. Interesting. We both had chemo, but
there you go. But we understand each other perfectly well.
So I had a nickel in my pocket, and I walked up to this stand, and I put it down on number 48. I can remember this like it happened yesterday. And the roulette wheel landed on 48. So the man looks at me, and he goes to take one of the large stuffed teddy bears off the top of the ring. And I said, no, I don't want that. So he said, well, what do you want? And I looked around, and there was a Brownie Hawkeye camera kit. And so I said, I want that. And that was my first. I have no idea why I picked it, but I just was in love with it. I carried that camera everywhere, and I took as much film as my mother would let me have. And it became a lifelong love of mine. Whenever I would travel, I would always look for museums that had photography collections. They weren't in those days, early days in my 40s and 50s, there weren't so many of them. But I was not raised with the idea that I could be a photographer. And my mother constantly said, "You got to get an education, got to get an education. Education's the key to everything." So I went through and I did a lot of things. I was in the Peace Corps, and then I went to graduate school, and I came out with a PhD, and I was doing research in drug addiction, which was interesting. But at a certain point, I realized they don't need more research in drug addiction. We know what's wrong with 75, even 80% of addicts. There's just no social will to correct it. I mean, it's a problem of poverty, it's a problem of psychology, and most importantly, it's a problem of job training. I mean, you know, people who work in car washes aren't particularly enthused about the work they're doing. They don't stop and say, "Wow, that car looks great." So, and anyway, most of the people that read the articles I was publishing were just looking for articles to cite for their own articles. So I decided to take a year off and figure out what I wanted to do. But during that year, I found that I could not do anything. I had to be involved in something. So I started photographing, you know, full-time instead of here and there. And I was, first time in my adult life, I was really happy with what I was doing. And at the end of that year, I had a few jobs. I had gotten some good feedback from someone who worked at an important museum in New York where I was living. I said, well, I'll try this for another year. And at the end of that second year, I had gotten gallery representation. So I thought, oh, this is really good. I'll try it another year. And, you know, it's not that you actively burn your bridges. It's just you turn around and they're not there anymore. Mm-hmm. So I transitioned to a life of photography. Interestingly, I've come back and I teach photography part-time at a school, high school, and I just love it.
So some of your, I understand that some of your photography work is displayed in Boston. Is that correct?
Yes. I have, I'm in the collection of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the New York Museum of Modern Art, and a bunch of other places. But the gallery that represents me is in Boston. It's called the Pucker Gallery. It's on downtown in Newbury Street. And they have a nice little drawer with my name on it, which I loved. Every time I'm in Boston, I like to go in and just look at the drawer.
So all of you guys watching tonight from all my Cape Codders, because that's where I am right now, you go down to Boston to Newbury Street and go check out Bill Aron's photography.
That's great. Thank you.
So Bill, we're down to our last few minutes. Can you let our audience know how they can find you, how to contact you, and where to get your book?
Okay, a couple of things. I am on Twitter at Bill Aron. I'm also on Facebook, and there's a Facebook page for a cancer page that I have. It's for my book, but it's also for news that I find out and post about cancer. And that page is New Beginnings. It's got, I think, cancer survival portraits, but if you just search for New Beginnings, it'll come up. And I have a website, billaron.com. Aron is with one A, Billaron. You know, one time I spelled my name for somebody and they said, "Are you sure it doesn't have two A's?" And the book is available. Well, it's been out just about a year, so it's not really in the Barnes and Nobles anymore, but some of the smaller bookstores may have it. But it's, of course, available on Barnes & Noble's website, on Amazon.com, and on all the sites that, all the internet sites that sell books. It can be found.
Can you hold your book up for us one more time so we can take a good look at it?
Do that.
And that is New Beginnings, The Triumphs of 120 Cancer Survivors. Great book. I love all those pictures.
Thank you. The two girls jumping on the cover,
Uh-huh.
There were two girls at a local college who they went to college, they joined the same sorority, they became friends, and then they discovered that each was a cancer survivor. And so
Wow.
I finished talking to them about their experiences because my my method of working is to interview people for up to 2 hours, and or as long as it takes, and then ask them how it feels to have gone through what they went through, and then construct a photograph on that. The technical issues are on me, but the theme of the photograph, so to speak, is a collaboration between us. Well, these two girls, just when I asked that question, they just looked at each other. They grabbed hands, they hopped up on this fountain ledge, and they just jumped in the air screaming. I, of course, made them do it 10 more times, but the fact remains the first picture was the best.
Oh, that's great. Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for being on the show with us tonight. I know that these stories are going to help so many people. And the way you just explained that cover to me just says it all. You get through it and you get on with life and you rejoice at the prospects of all that you are going to accomplish now that it's over.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Kat. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And I enjoyed the insights that you came up with from your experience with your breast cancer.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's a tough road.
It is.
That's not to be understated, but it's finite, as I said, and it does end one way or another. And for more and more people, it's ending on a positive note. If not becoming cured, the disease at least is reduced to a chronic disease that can be beaten down. I know my cancer, they didn't get it all in the surgery, so it comes back when it gets to a certain point. We beat it down again, and it comes back. So you have what's called a vacation or a holiday period between your times of treatment, and your life is, really as normal.
That's great. Well, thank you again. I see that you're so busy, even your phones are ringing now. So thank you again, Bill.
Hopefully it's in order for 1,000 books.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody out there watching the show tonight. Make sure you tune in next Monday night, where we will have more great guests for you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Kat.